Very, very good afternoon, and a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and an ever so slightly later start than usual because I've been walking on a golf course for the last 4 hours, which normally I'm not terribly quick at, even more so as a partial Achilles-laden invalid, but I'm doing so in a very happy place, because today is day one of the Investec South African Open, the golf tournament that is the second oldest championship in the world, and that is playing out on the course that sits outside the building I am currently in. This is the magnificent clubhouse at Blair Atholl, which you've probably flown over if you've ever been in or out of Lanseria Airport, and which plays host to a tournament on what is officially the longest golf course in the history of the DP World Tour, formerly the European Tour. So if you're a golf nut, you'll realize just what a challenge that makes this course, and why, when you finished your round as a professional, a glass of wine is probably something you would accept quite happily. And there is some fabulous wine on the course, which is why I am here and doing the show from here. We're sitting with the team from AdVini, which is collectively Ken Forrester and Kleine Zalze, Le Bonheur and L'Avenir and Stellenbosch Vineyards. A great selection of wine. I'm going to be trying some of that and talking about the wine journey, not just AdVini, but their globe-trotting head of international marketing, I think that's his title, as we make our way through this evening's show, and also crossing to one of the most exciting young winemakers we have in South Africa. The good news, if you were about to turn off, never fear, Ken Forrester is not on the show. You don't have to worry. You don't need to be here for 4 hours. We've got a couple of different people to talk about some wonderful wine, and to do so while watching me in my rather dashing Investec bucket hat. Thank you, Peter. Makes me look even more charming than usual. Before we go into that, though, I meet up with a very special guest who also happens to be an extremely good friend of mine. Let's catch up on a little bit of the latest wine news. Well, this is this weekend. If you're thinking, what shall I do this weekend? Either to drown my sorrows if there are strange movements in the world of politics, or to celebrate something good, perhaps your favourite is doing well at the Investec South African Open, well, you could head along to the Franschhoek Monument, where I've seen some photos already. Darielle Robertson and her team are getting the Cup Classique and Champagne Festival ready to go. It's got a garden party feel. I fear tickets are sold out for the third. However, for the fourth, there are still some going. That is Sunday. What a lovely way to finish your weekend. Some great South African bubbles, and amongst them are not just the South African names you'd come to expect at the festival, but also a fair amount of champagne as well. So all of that is on your wine drinking horizon. So that is this weekend, the Franschhoek Cup Classique and Champagne Festival. And that's going to be just a beautiful outdoor celebration of an event that's happened a lot in Cape Town and also happened in Johannesburg, and is now returning this weekend under the auspices of Her Royalness, the Mayor of Franschhoek, and that would be Darielle. So if you don't have your tickets yet, Sunday in particular is one that you might want to look out for. It's not the only event happening this weekend, though. There's also the chance, if you are a little closer to the Somerset West side of town, Helderberg Fresh is coming up. Now, you might remember we had Hugo Jacobs on the show just a few weeks ago, and he was talking about that particular event, where it's the food as much as the wine. You've got people like Bertus Besson and the chefs from Salt at Waterford all cooking, but you've also got wineries headlined by Vergelegen who are hosting the event. And so if you're not at the Franschhoek Cup Classique and Champagne Festival, then Helderberg Fresh is your alternative option. Both of them, I think, will be terrific events. That happens this Saturday, does Helderberg Fresh, a lovely part of the world, and that is the sister event, Constantia Fresh, and one to have a look at going to this weekend. Of course, if you're not at either of those and you happen to be up in Johannesburg, and the place to be is the Investec South African Open, where not only will you get the chance to watch some great golf, but thanks to the gentleman beside me, you'll have the chance to drink some really good wine. Lo, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's good to have you up here. There's a lot we can talk about golf, but which has to start with one particular story, and that would be the story of a round of golf that I remember probably with more fondness now than I did at the time. You and I played together with Ruben Riffle,
Yes.
the celebrated chef. We were over in Scotland for the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships. We played at Kings Barnes, which I think is one of the most glorious golf courses on the planet. It's just a delight. And you'd probably be able to say that more than me, because although I've played it maybe a dozen times and you've only played it once, you've seen more of the golf course than I have. Because I think you shot 140 that day, and at one point technically ended up in Wales.
100% correct, Dan. Thanks for reminding me again, as you often do, about that amazing experience. Not only a course record for the most shots played in success of 18, but also probably for the most amount of golf balls lost on the day, I presume. It's pro Vs.
It was a great deal of fun, though. And it speaks to something I'd like to chat to you a bit about before we jump into the wine itself and the relationship here at the Open. And that's the life that you have led in wine, because since I've known you, and that goes back to the Annie Else days. We did a lot when Annie Else Wines partnered up with the Dan Nichols Show, and an auspicious day today. If you didn't know, it is the final episode of the final season of the Dan Nichols Show, premieres this evening, and for a long time Annie Else Wines were a very proud partner. Whether it was with Annie Else, your time before, your time now with Ken Forrester, you've got through wine to see an extraordinary part of the world.
Sure. Look, it's 100% correct. You know, this job has afforded me opportunities that I don't take for granted, and I think to myself every day that I've basically been across the world, say South America and certain places in Southeast Asia, and truly, truly blessed to do what I do on a daily basis and work now currently with Ken Forrester Wines and the broader AdVini group. But in the past year, working for Annie Else Wines, also got to see a vast portion of the globe. Absolute privilege.
Before I ask you about the coolest places and give you some time to think about that in the back of your head, it sounds like you just basically go on holiday, and most of your social media posts suggest that that is the case. What is it actually like, though? What is it day to day when you are over there? Because I suspect it's not quite as glamorous as Instagram might suggest.
Yeah, you know, those Instagram reels of life versus reality. You definitely get to these places and you're in awe, but before you can even wipe your eyes out from a jet lag flight or whatever, you get picked up by your agent or your distributor on that side. You get chucked into a car and take it to some remote part of the city or outskirts of the city and into a big warehouse, and you're meeting sales team, sales reps, and you're conducting masterclasses, tastings, wine tastings, educating their sales force on your wines. And then usually from there, you go out into the trade, meeting restaurants, hotels, bars, various type of redistributor partners perhaps. And your day is populated literally from meeting to meeting, and taking your little bag of wine, with all wheels on it, rolling it to the streets of London, Reykjavik in Iceland, all these random places, and you're just basically selling your wine. But what has been for me the most striking thing of the years is that sometimes people are almost less interested in the wine and more interested in the stories. So I often come to the conclusion, I don't sell wine, I sell stories.
And I think that applies to the marketing of most things, but wine in particular. You're selling those stories, though, and you're selling them well, and you're moving some wine. It does seem like a huge amount of effort. Here you are, you've flown into Oslo, and you're going to meet a restaurant, and you walk away, and after a 15-hour flight costing you tens of thousands of rand, you've got a guy who's taken an order for 4 cases of wine, if you're lucky. Yes, it's cool to have your wine on lists around the world, but commercially, does it really make sense to be doing all this travel?
If you look about it from a commercial perspective, and if you take it down to that isolated trip, probably not. But what we're trying to build out is a footprint, and trying to build, not just our brands, but brand South Africa. So perhaps I might have just taken an order for 15 cases or so. But if that person was switched on to South Africa from a specific wine that we make within Ken Forrester or the broader AdVini group, it makes the next South African's job a little bit easier. And, we go out there and we start building it, and we're starting to get this kind of international footprint that allows us to, over time, make that one trip a lot more worth it. So like wine, it doesn't take 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks to produce a bottle of wine. It sometimes takes 3 years to produce a bottle of Cap Classique, or even in our case, the Renegade sometimes takes 2 years to get to the market. So we don't go into these type of trips with a short-term vision. We always go for the long term. What are we going to try and build in that specific market, so that in 10 years' time, there is 2 or 3 containers of wine going to that client, or not even 10 years, preferably 5 years years. And that makes the journey definitely worth it.
How has the conversation changed in that decade in terms of perhaps at the start having to tell people where South Africa was and this is our wine, through a period of no, South African wine doesn't just belong on the bottom shelf of a supermarket, to now hopefully having the kind of conversation of how South African wine can sit alongside a Bordeaux or a Burgundy or a Tuscany or a Rioja alternative. Has that been the evolution of that conversation?
100%. And I mean, my tenure in the industry has been relatively short compared to some of the greats and the legends in the game, like Ken himself. And I can only imagine what the conversation must have been like back then, where you literally first had to take a whiteboard and draw people a picture of, this is the African continent, we're on the southern part of Africa, and yes, we make wine, and you know Nelson Mandela, and everything you go through, that whole vetting process before you even start talking about the wine. In the last, I would say, 5 or so years, the South African category has really started to gain its own momentum, where people are asking for the South African wines across the value chain, from the entry-level type wines that we produce that we're so phenomenally good at, over-delivering on that value for money proposition at the bottom end, all the way through to our high-end wines. Again, in our case, things like the famous FMC, or other brands who go with their, talking about the Mullineaux and Bucca Notes Cliffs out there with their chocolate blocks. Those guys have been flag bearers like ourselves for promoting the value at all across the value chain. And it's an exciting thing because we get you into the market with phenomenal wines, priced at extremely competitive price points, and it's starting to really gain traction, whereas people want wine from the Southern Hemisphere, the New World wines. And when they're looking at value propositions from that perspective, we are right up there. But then again, like you say, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the great Bordeaux of the world in recent times. We're making some phenomenal reds, some phenomenal whites, and we don't have to stand back for anybody today.
The journeys have taken you to some incredible places, as this conversation has played out. What would the picks be? What are the ones that have not just really stood out, but surprised you in terms of your travels?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, that's such a interesting question in and of itself, but it's... I've, as I said, been fortunate, we've literally been across the globe. To pick one on short notice is very tough, but surprising visits probably been a place like North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, where you're in the middle of nowhere. It's just south of the Canadian border. You don't expect much to be there. And the hospitality of the people, the hunger of there for them to know more about South Africa as a country, as a destination, from safari to the wine to just our general hospitality and sights and sceneries, they really make you feel at home. And I wasn't expecting that at all. And as a country as big as America, one of the first places I actually want to go back to is the Dakotas. It's not on everyone's bucket list. I want to see New York, I want to go to Miami or Las Vegas or Chicago or San Fran. No, I want to go back to, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, like something like that. And then another memorable one, which I doubt many people will ever get to visit, is a place like Iceland. Yes, it's extremely expensive to be there, but to be in this amazing place, basically a volcanic, a nation that's formed out of years and years of millennia from old volcanoes. Again, hospitable, friendly people. And, going there in the dead of winter, it's a hell of a special place. And stark contrast, of course, anything that we in South Africa see with our, vast kind of topography and geography we have, we think we've got it all. Not until you get to a place like Iceland. It's truly magical. And I will advocate to anybody, travel to Reykjavik if you can. If you're going to the States or elsewhere, don't go the direct routes. Fly up into Europe, skip onto Icelandic Air, into Reykjavik, spend a day or two, and then from there you can fly to North America. Quite easy.
Did you pair any wines with some of the more renowned Icelandic cuisine?
Jeez. No, I was there for too short. We were there for 3 days doing the hard graft, hard hustle. Didn't feature any, we didn't really do wine dinners per se. It was more of an exploratory venture there. So we were very lucky just to dine at a couple of great restaurants and eat a lot of their seafood, because they obviously love that. And most other things are basically imported into Iceland. But just from the pure experience of that place, I would recommend it to go to anybody, or anybody to recommend to go there. Yeah.
and is on my list of places to visit. You get to market directly to people by traveling the world, which is one way of having the conversation. Another is by showcasing the wine through a golf tournament that goes out to 700 million homes around the world, which is exactly what the Investec South Open does through the Sunshine and DP World Tours. And you're able to showcase your group now, and it's a space where the individual wines, I think, are very well known to people in South Africa. AdVini, perhaps not quite so much. Tell me, before we cross over to a very exciting young winemaker who's going to be joining us in a moment to talk about wine, tell me a little about this group, how it's come about, and how Ken Forrester fits into this particular puzzle.
Okay, I'll try to keep it as short as I can. But so AdVini Vignobles is a French wine company. They own about 28 French champagne brands, oh no, sorry, not champagne brands, French wine brands scattered across all of France, in the southern parts of France, in Provence, to Bordeaux, into Burgundy, Loire. They really are quite broadly diversified from that regard. And then in 2009, they acquired a wine brand called Domaine La Roche, which is a Burgundian white wine Chardonnay producer. And through this acquisition, they actually figured out that Domaine La Roche actually owned L'Avenir, which was obviously, to us that know in South Africa, it's on the R44 on your way to Paarl, on the left-hand side. Beautiful property. And they had no idea what this was, and they traveled to South Africa with the original intent to sell the wine, because why, as a global French wine company, would you be interested in South African wines in 2009? And they arrived here with the intent to sell, and they were gobsmacked at our hospitality, at the people, at the quality of our wines, and they fell in love. And they then decided to actually stay and keep the brand and nurture the brand and restore it, to its heyday reputation. And since then, they've just grown a little bit every year. And some of the original consultants that they called in to work with their winemakers and everybody was guys like Ken Forrester and even Kobus Basson from Kleine Zalze. And those relationships and the seeds were probably sown. And then fast forward a number of years, came along, and Ken saw the opportunity to sell a portion of his brand to a French company, to preserve the longevity of the brand and all these sorts of things. And then Stellenbosch Vineyards was acquired. Then they got in, obviously, in the interim also de Bonheur. And after that, the latest acquisition was Kleine Zalze. And they've done this by, their kind of multinational expansion, I would say, vision. They realized that the world of wine isn't just isolated to France. The growing regions that are really attracting attention around the world go beyond the borders of the old world wine-making regions like Italy, Spain, and obviously France. And South Africa is a shining light in the southern hemisphere. And to invest and diversify their portfolio into brands like ourselves is strategically a very good decision, in my opinion. And you look at how brands like ourselves are doing at the moment, even with things like COVID in the past, we're just going from strength to strength at the moment. We're going like the steam train into our record year at the moment.
It's a really exciting part of a really exciting industry, which is fueled by some very talented winemakers. So let's cross to our winemaker. Sean Matthys is down at Ken Forrester in Somerset West. Ken himself is currently swanning it up at a nudist resort in Zanzibar. It's just a truly horrible thought. Sean is looking a lot more respectable. Sean, welcome. Lovely to have you back on the show.
Dan, welcome. Thanks, Lo. How's it? Lovely to be on the show.
Tell me a little bit about your thoughts from a winemaking perspective on being part of this family, because at first thought, a lot of people often think, oh, hang on, if you're Ken Forrester, you can't be sidling up with Kleine Zalze. You're trying to compete with them, and you're trying to sell more wine than L'Avenir. And it's often a theory people have that's largely mistaken, because we've got such a close-knit family of people in the South African wine space. And I'm guessing that having these kinds of even closer relationships with these estates that you guys have affords you as the winemaker just a whole new range of sounding boards, people to bounce ideas off, and a community of winemakers to work together with.
Yeah, indeed. I actually was born on Kleine Zalze, and I always thought I would go back as a winemaker, but since they joined the group, so we colleagues in that case. And I just love being. I've been working with some of the group's winemakers alongside Bernard and Abraham from Stellenbosch Vineyards, Dirk as well, and I'm also recently acquired some advice from William, and also getting more help from whatever I can from area in that case. But yeah, it's quite lekker to join the group, being the youngster amongst them, trying to absorb and doing my own thing as well, improvise that and that. So yeah, it's great to be part of this group, being part of the AdVini group, and taking Chenin Blanc and the rest of South African wines forward.
Well, let's talk about the wines that you in particular have taken forward. It's a wonderful setup that Ken has, and there are many, many people in a similar space where they take all of the credit and do absolutely none of the work. You put in a huge shift every year in terms of producing wine, and it's been a terrific story. We've just heard Lo's story of traveling the world and exploring. You've got to travel the world through wine by discovering wine from all over the world, from that marvelous cellar of Ken's, and seeing your own career grow, your own winemaking ability grow, and you've got to a space now where I think you're not just very comfortable as a winemaker, but very established as one. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what it's meant to you, as a little kid out of Kleine Zalze, to now become a really established winemaker in the winelands.
Yeah, like you mentioned, when I got out of Elsenburg, just fresh out of Elsenburg, worked a few local harvests, and then Ken scooped me up under his wing, and from there he actually, by exposing me to the different wines out of his cellar, and as well, I didn't get the opportunity to travel abroad to do and harvest, but hopefully next year, since the friends were here, they asked me to come in, give them some advice on Chenin Blanc in the Loire. Who knows, next year again, but it's been an amazing journey working alongside Kenny. Of course, he's done some harvest abroad. He's done an amazing job, like Lo said, being a pioneer of specifically Chenin Blanc and etc. For the South African wine industry. And I just tagged along. I just soaked up as much as possible from him. He exposed to me, always made me involved. He always grinded me, groomed me, and I just stole with my ears and my eyes, and that's it. And today I always wanted to be the guy behind the shadow. So yeah, but unfortunately my time is now to rise and shine. So I'm up for that.
You've got a real treasure here, Lo, in terms of Sean, who started as very much cutting his teeth straight out of learning to make a bit of wine, and in a relatively short space of time has become, and I don't say this lightly, become a pretty fundamental part of this operation you guys have.
100%. I mean, you talk about key men or key women in your company as well, and we have quite a few of them, and Sean is no doubt integral to what we do on a daily basis. As you rightly said, Ken has basically built this brand single-handedly over the last almost 30 years. But we've become kind of so successful, and Ken's demand and Ken's time is to such a degree that, he can't spend that much time in the cellar now than he used to. He really is still the face of the brand and has to travel the world. And for him to have the trust in somebody to leave the country for 6 weeks at a time and make sure that his wines are, left in capable hands, it's a big responsibility. And a guy like Sean has really stepped up to that plate in a big way. And, as you said, it's the last couple of years, as opposed to just having Sean kind of in the shadows, Ken has really given him a bit of a springboard in a way and said, here's 1 or 2 ranges of wines, go test that creative itch and do what you feel you would like to do. If you wanted to make a Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay, which is not necessarily part of our core focus as a winery, Sean has the freedom to do that under what we call the Misfits label. And is really, at the moment, we've got a nice Syrah and Grenache, so it might seem that his interests still lie in our kind of red wine direction, as Ken has, possibly groomed him into over the years. But he's having fun with playing with a different interpretation of style from Syrah and Grenache. And I know there's a Chardonnay lying around. Hey, Sean.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm still thinking of doing next year. So yeah. So it's like Lo said. With all of the other ranges where Ken, I had to copy and paste Ken in the Petit range, the Ken Forrester Reserve, Icon range. Ken allowed me to say, listen, just go ahead, you take charge and show me what you got and just expose that creativity. So I've started the Misfit range, which is like Lau explained, it doesn't fit into anything. It's kind of a misfit, like myself. So I've recently done a single, but it's very limited quantities, like small, like 2 barrels or 1 barrel, etc. So I've done 100% Syrah, and then I have 100% Grenache, and then also Chardonnay barrel lying around. I've done a Cinsault, a Pinot Noir from Stellenbosch. So I'm doing a lot of fun stuff. So I'm still thinking of breaking my head what's next, but I'm sure between the next couple of months, I will come up with something cool and quirky in that case.
I have absolutely no doubt. I've had a taste of a few of those Misfits, and they're fun wines, and the expression within them is very clearly one of someone who's having a great deal of fun making them. Let's step away from the Forrester space and have a look at some of the other wines that are here. Lau, you've just poured us some of the Le Bonheur Chardonnay. So we've got that. Winemaker extraordinaire Sean. Tell us a little bit about this wine and what you think of it.
Is that the Le Bonheur brand? Yes, they William. I know William personally. He makes some amazing wines. That's just lovely, pure Chardonnay. It's nice and lean. Great enjoyment. I mean, sometimes you need wine. You don't want to be educated over it. You just want to enjoy it. And that's that type of wine. You don't want a book. You don't want a WSET level course for it. You just want a nice Chardonnay that ticks off all the boxes. That's the perfect Chardonnay.
In fact, about the Chard is actually it's the second most sold white wine in all of Canada.
Really? This particular one?
It's one of South Africa's lesser known success stories. Le Bonheur is a brand, obviously, being Canada, or Canada itself, especially on the East Coast. If you think about Quebec and Montreal being so French, a name like Le Bonheur resonates with them. So originally, the name probably was what converted people to buying it in the first place. But, I stand corrected on the numbers, but it's probably close to 1 million bottles of this sold in Canada alone. It's quite extraordinary, and as a wine, it's that perfect mixture that kind of deviates from the traditional New World styles of Chardonnay, where they're quite heavily oaked and almost like these big oak bombs. This is kind of that yin and yang between this beautiful fresh acidity, for which Chardonnay can actually be known for, with a little bit of oak exposure to it. And like Sean's rightly said, William at Le Bonheur has just taken this wine from strength to strength, and it's such a phenomenal success story.
Oh, you probably didn't know that. If you're watching this in Canada, thank you for drinking Le Bonheur. Keep doing so. It is helping South Africa. It's a wonderfully accessible Chardonnay that doesn't ask too many questions of you in the very best possible way, which makes it quite different to the second wine we'll have a look at that Lau's got here. And this time it stems from Stellenbosch Vineyards. This is some Verdelho, who is not, in fact, the current centre-back playing for Portugal in the World Cup, but actually a white grape variety. Back to you, Sean. Not just this wine in particular, but for somebody thinking, hey, Verdelho, I've never heard of that. What on earth is it? Please enlighten us.
Yeah, Verdelho is one of those varieties. It's not quite popular. Like you said, people think it's someone's name or mistress or whoever in that case. But it's a quite if I'm correctly, it's one of the very few plantings in Stellenbosch itself that they produce the wine from. And it's quite a limited release that they do, but it's quite imbalanced wine. It's great. You can't say it's like a Chardonnay or Chenin. If you want to try something different that won't disappoint, with great purity of fruit, great balance, acidity, subtle, elegant type of wine, the Verdelho is that type of variety. If people really want to explore a different variety, they should definitely go for that. Yeah.
Yet another one of the AdVini group. Tell me a bit about Stellenbosch Vineyards.
So Stellenbosch Vineyards, obviously, it's actually a phenomenal success story in and of itself. It's found on the original Belmont farm, and it dates back to one of South Africa's oldest wine-producing properties. And so in and of itself, it's got a great history and a story to tell. And as that brand expanded, and they had to kind of also pivot with the times and make a wine from the kind of fun and enjoyable Velvet range, they stepped up and introduced their Stellenbosch Vineyards kind of blue label range, which you can find in most liquor stores in South Africa at the moment. And again, much like we have the misfits in our range to have a winemaker scratch that creative itch, they brought out, the Stellenbosch Vineyards limited release wines. And under that brand, they've got Grenache, they've got Verdeo, they've got a wine called Verona, which is, only 100 stockies planted in all of the country.
Sounds like a pandemic with a list.
It does, Verona. And it's a white wine variety that literally is only 100 little vines planted across the country, and Stellenbosch Vineyards has a right to those to make wine. So the winemaking team there, led by Abraham and Bernard Claessens, or Abraham de Villiers and Bernard Claessens, they've been there. I mean, Abraham has been there for almost 20 years. His dad before him has been the viticulture of the company for like 30 years. So there's so much family history there. Bernard himself been there for 15 years. Sean alluded to it earlier, that they've worked closely together over a number of years. And they also find their kind of stride also by acting as sometimes a service seller, to other brands who don't have, let's say, the space, for instance, to make wine. They can actually rent out that type of space for other brands who have excess production requirements. So really, it's a fantastic brand to actually be associated with. And we're hell of a proud of these wines, especially some eclectic, kind of, we call these exotic grape varieties in South Africa, whereas if you're in Europe and Spain, Italy, Portugal, this is, your daily wine.
Standard fare.
Standard fare.
In terms, Sean, of having Verdelho grapes like it in South Africa, it's a tiny element. Yes, it's great fun for you as winemakers to produce, and for the wine geeks amongst us, it's something fun and interesting to discover. Is that kind of where the role of this wine ends, or does something like a Verdelho, and it's not the only grape that is produced in microscopic quantities, does it have a greater role? Is it something that can become either as a single varietal or as part of a white blend, a slightly more prominent part of the South African wine story?
Yes, definitely. These little varieties all plays a bit in part and pieces. It makes us unique as well, the DNA. I mean, some farmer discovered it and decided to plant it. But it's also a unique selling point, like Lo can tell you more into detail of that. I have the easiest job making wine. He's got the hardest job selling wine. But yeah, definitely. Or a blending part. Sometimes the varieties are unseen in blends. They just add it into blend to form some sort of a glue or some sort of keeps everything together. And in that case, but if you discover these varieties on their own and say, hold up, wait a minute, I just want to bottle this on its own, and then people will discover it and exactly end up loving these varieties.
I think that's a really nice way of framing it, and it adds to the richness of our wine experience, which leads into a space that has done exactly that over the last 5-10 years. Nothing we haven't said on this show before, the story of rosé and the way in which it has changed, and this in particular, you've got a rosé here that does two things. Aesthetically, it is charming. It's just one of the most striking bottles with its glass top, and it looks really, really good, but it also delivers a style of rosé that is very much in the present. It's not the overly thick, sweet, syrupy kind of style we were often subjected to. It's very much the kind of rosé that is now driving this exact space into one that is so much more welcomed.
Well, 100%. I mean, Dan, you could probably think back to your varsity days, drinking your sweet Robertson wines and those sorts of things.
Proudly so. Proudly so.
But those type of styles of rosé used to dictate the industry in South Africa. People, so much so that people came up to us years ago at Ken Forrester. We were making something like a petite rosé and saying, this isn't rosé, it isn't dark red, and it isn't sweet. And it's been a long journey for us as South Africans within South Africa to change the narrative of what traditional rosé looks like and perhaps even tastes like. And brands like L'Avenir, as I already mentioned, been acquired acquired by AdVini in 2009, they were also one of the first ones to look at a premium rosé in South Africa, and at at no little risk to themselves, because the rosé category was just starting in South Africa, where people moved away from the slightly darker, sweeter rosés to the more what we refer to Provençal styles. So southern parts of France, Provence, where they've made these beautiful, light, elegant, fruit-forward, dry styles of rosé for decades already. Only started here at South Africa shores about 10 years ago. And AdVini, which finds their home in a place called Maisonneuve with a brand called Jean Jean. They've been around for 150 years. They're in the heart of the Provence, and their bread and butter is rosé. And Dirk, the winemaker from Lavinier, soon after the acquisition from AdVini and Lavinier, traveled there and was inspired and thought, well, if they can do this, why don't we do this at home? And he took it a step further. And as Lavinier, as a Pinotage and Chenin Blanc specialist, Dirk wanted to go back to their roots and say, well, I'm not going to make rosé from the Provençal styles, Grenache and Sancerre. What I'm going to give Pinotage, our domestic grape variety, a chance. And this was the result, and truly extraordinary. The amount of fruit on this wine, the texture, just the beautiful body it's got weight, it's got elegance, it's got finesse, and it's made from 100% Pinotage. And it's even, if you put the, as you said, glass closure back in, it's called the Vino Lock, it's the latest pick. You look at the base of the wine, and you can't quite probably see it on camera there, but it's got a little butt in there, and that's actually molded on a protea that was being grown on the farm at the time. So if you hold it upside down and present this bottle to your loved ones, you're basically giving them a Pinotage protea.
So it's a beautiful bottle, it's a lovely style of wine, and it embraces Pinotage, and it's nowhere near as heavy as you might expect it to be coming out of Pinotage, which I think, Sean, is a really interesting part of the South African rosé story. We've gone past the stage of let's just not make it as sweet and as heavy as it used to be, but also let's embrace some different interpretations, not just here, but if I look at shows we've had of late, we've had Alto telling us about their Cabernet Sauvignon rosé. We had quite recently Alice Verloren on the show. They've got a rosé that features Tinta Barocca in it. So it seems, Sean, as though there is a real flair for experimentation in finding out how we as South Africa can take rosé forward, and doing so very much on our own terms.
Yes, definitely. I've seen some Shiraz, Merlot, Cape Franc rosé. I've seen people do as Mourvedre rosé. I mean, we do a Grenache rosé, but Pinotage rosé, that's Glen Rose is just perfect. It's just a great example of what the diversity of Pinotage can offer you in that case. And coming from a disadvantaged background, we all intend for sweet rosé. Even as a student, like you guys were as well, we used to clap a lot of sweet rosés. But as you intend to become a more wine expert or geek, you intend to move away. But people nowadays want that nice and dry, lighter style of rosé, which is packed with a little bit of fruit flavors coming through, but still lingers right dry to the finish. That's what people want now.
And what about for you as a winemaker, the challenge then, in that you are sitting down, right, I'm going to make some rosé as Ken Forrester, as the Misfits. In the past, it might have been 2 or 3 grapes of the Cape Provençal suggested varietals that we would use. Now it's kind of, well, if it's red, it can go in. It opens up lots of different doors, but it might also pose a few challenges. What am I going to settle on?
Yeah, it definitely poses a few challenges, but you have to look at what you got on the property and use that to your advantage, and just say, okay, do a little bit of research and say, okay, yeah, actually in somewhere in France, or they do a rosé with Grenache, or they do a rosé with Mourvedre in that case. But just the time of picking is key, because you always want a lower alcohol of wine, you want a little bit of less color, but simultaneously you want phenolics in that case, you want flavors coming through, but not too much alcohol in that case. You want people to enjoy a glass and have another one and have another one. That's the whole key to it. Just producing that wine that ticks that boxes, and in just being that lighter style and enjoy a refreshing type of style of rosé.
The work of a winemaker is never done, especially when he happens to be on Dan Really Likes Wine, and I'm asking demanding questions, which I will continue to do as we move on to some red, and we head over to a winery low that I think you'd have to say, if you were to simply go through the awards, and while individually you might query one or two, the sheer volume, whether it is Old Mutual, or it is Plata, or it is Michelangelo, or it is, I've run out, just every single one now. Kleine Zalze's success rate over the last 5 years has been staggering.
It's been phenomenal. It's been, up until about 6 months ago, it's been something, and we from Ken Forrester Wines, perhaps sometimes, and as the broader industry, kind of jealous about success, right? But if it's in the international scene, 100%, because it's growing the South African brand. And then AdVini comes along, and we as a group, we acquire Kleine Zalze, and it's now we're a proud family, so it really is inspirational. And we go back to, Cobus Basson and his vision that he had over 20 years ago, turning a little piece of land, just outside Stellenbosch into this amazing worldwide global phenomenon. And Kleine Zalze really is one of South Africa's great success stories, and the accolades speak for themselves. There's a lot of brands out there, domestically and internationally, and it's part and parcel of marketing speak. This is the best wine, or we lead in this category, or whatever. But few brands can actually put gravitas behind a statement like that, like Kleine Zalze can. And the winemaking team led by Ari at the moment, it's these guys are just switched on and exactly what they're about. They're focused, they're intent driven, and they produce year in and year out stellar, top-notch quality wines.
They also do something, Sean, which is not dissimilar to what you do at a very personal level. You have your Misfits range, you spoke about a little earlier, where you do a lot of experimentation. You play around with a lot of stuff. They've got a very similar space, which is Project Z, and that isn't just in itself the opportunity for those of us who like buying wine from the fringes and to drink it, but it shows they've got their own in-house laboratory. They've got a real sense of pushing themselves, of extending, of finding out what works and what doesn't. And you'd have to say that is part of the reason that the wines that sit in the more mainstream space are reflecting such success. They've put in a lot of work at the ground.
Yes, like you said, people are kind of, sometimes they know the brand quite well. They come to me, they seen you at wine events, they're like, oh, we know Ken Forrester wines, brilliant wines, we love it, and then they walk past to the next producer. Whereas when you experiment stuff like with the Project Z, I had the privilege to taste only the Chenin Blanc. I haven't had the privilege to taste some of the other experiments, but great wines. I mean, alternative styles of stuff that they use, like amphoras or clay pots in that case. And people want that, like a brand like Kleine Zalze as well. People know them. I've seen it at events where I represented AdVini wines, and people come, oh, we know Kleine Zalze brilliant wines, and they will pass. Whereas this, you can say, hold on, listen, taste this wine. It's a new wine that we produce. Have a taste, have a go at it. So people want that, specifically your hardcore fans, followers out there, consumers. They want something different, and they believe you won't disappoint them in that case. So it's important to experiment and bring out something new, keep ahead and be on your toes.
It's a quality that many of our great winemakers have, and it's lovely to see it in Sean and in the team from Kleine Zalze, who have produced in particular this Cabernet Sauvignon. Before we wrap up with one or two wines from Ken Forrester, which Sean, of course, has guided, tell us a little bit about this Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a grape in particular, doesn't just do really well in Stellenbosch, Sean, but Kleine Zalze seem to have mastered it over the last little while as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I used to run through those vineyards as a kid. But yeah, it's one of those. I'm a cab lover myself, a Stellenbosch cab lover, and that just means for me it ticks off both boxes in terms of Cabernet Sauvignon. The balance of the wine, the tannin structure, the boldness, it's there, but it's such elegance as well, and simultaneously price point as well. I mean, you can these days Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, they go for quite some fair, premium prices. But that's the if I can't afford that premium price, I always go for that's the Kleine Zalze Cabernet Sauvignon, because it's just that that Cabernet which you enjoy. You don't need to age it for another 10 years in order to get rid of the tannins, the bold tannins, but that's just beautiful structured in this wine.
All right, well, let's wrap up with the wine that stems from the home of both Sean and of Lowe. And the first of them, it's a wine that when we talk about awards, and you guys have won many, this is one that is probably most valuable to you in the last, I'd say this decade, because to get a publication like Decanter to say your Chenin Blanc is the best in the world is quite a hefty statement.
Yeah, there was, we got this email, every year we submit our wines to Decanter award tasting, and we don't submit the same wines every year, it's just a few here and there. Ken had a particular feeling about 2021, and we submitted the sample, and we got this email back, must have been end of about May or so, mid-June, and just said, congratulations, your wine is won best in class. And we were like, best in class what? Best in class Creek Cap, best in class South African wine, best in class, what we had no idea. And then they disembargoed the results, and they now published it, and out of nowhere we got best Chenin Blanc in the world. And like you say, from a publication like Decanter, which is in the same league as Wine Spectator in the United States, they basically dictate the ebb and flow of the wine industry with one article or one score. They can change your entire outlook from the world, how they consider you. And to win that award was truly, truly amazing. And what's even more amazing, it's not even by our standards what we qualify as our best Chenin. So to have a mid-tier wine at our price of 145 Rand a bottle to win the best Chenin Blanc in the world, up against not only our own Cheninn's, but from around the world, it really is a phenomenal accolade. And I don't think any of us were prepared for what was to follow.
Did it have a meaningful impact on sales?
Massive. Within 3 days, we had to place the wine on allocation globally. I had people who in the past would order 15, 20 cases, as a combined pallet order. They would now all of a sudden say, well, I'll take a container. Calm down, so it really had a massive meaningful impact, not just I think for us as a brand, but for the Chenin Blanc category at the specific price point, and again just for South Africa to win one of these accolades it's phenomenal. And we're not isolated in that regard. We've had wineries like Jordan Wines, for instance, have won phenomenal awards over the years. Best in show at the IWC, best winery, white wine winery of the year. Similarly, Kanonkop next to that, also best white or red wine winery of the year at IWC awards. And these things are just coming our way as a South African category, and we are immensely proud to be part of this whole movement.
Well, that extends to Sean as winemaker. You had a steering hand in giving the world this best in class, according to Decanter. What for you, Sean, makes this particular wine stand out?
Well, it gets my hands and my sweat and my feet in there. Now, this wine has always been a best wine that we produce for the public. The public always they always love this the style of Chenin Blanc. It ticks off all the boxes, specifically where people want that category where they don't want overwhelming of oak in wine or the unwooded wines. They want a little bit of complexity, and this wine has always been for us. I remember the day I started and had the first blending and tasting system with Ken, and he said to me, this wine is about balance. And I said, like, balance? What do you mean by balance? He said, it has to have that fresher fruit and then a little bit of richness and complexity in the palate. And this is what this wine offers. It's got so much more to it, and at price point, people just scoop it up because they can't believe they get more for it than what they paid for. And that's what I love about this wine.
And then there is one other wine, and having just said all of that with Sean, why he loves it, why you guys are the Chenin Blanc headline act, the FMC is as good as Chenin Blanc as South African producers year in, year out, all of a sudden you've got this red wine called the Renegade. How difficult is it for you from a marketing perspective to go out and tell the world, buy our red wine, when Decanter has just told that entire world that it's white wine that you actually do well?
Well, we're not just a one-trick pony. Let's say Ken isn't just a one-trick pony, right? And I think to be a winery and competitive in the current market, domestically and abroad, you've got to play in both sides of the argument. You've got to be a red wine producer and a white wine producer, if you really want to see a market share. And for us, it's not just a marketing gimmick, for instance. Ken ran with a Chenin Blanc in the early 90s when nobody else would. Yes, they were making a lot of it, but not in these calibers and styles of wine. But in the same vein, Ken himself loves his red wines. And he, over the years, as a successful restaurateur here in Johannesburg, developed quite a profound sense of appreciation with Rhone varietal wines. Rhone varieties referring to Shiraz, Grenache, and Mourvèdre from the region of Rhone in France. And when he got into Stellenbosch in the early 90s, he looked at what was being planted and what was being promoted and pushed. And a lot of that was Cabernet-style wines, Bordeaux-style, Cab Merlots, with a bit of Cinsault and Shiraz thrown in here and there for good measure. But nobody was really flying the flag of the Rhone varietal reds. And Ken was first in Stellenbosch to plant Mourvèdre, only second in the country to Sebastian Beaumont's dad, who planted it in Botriver before Ken, a number of years before. And then, added a bit of Grenache to that mix, and you've got this wine we call the Renegade. And it's a Shiraz-driven wine with Grenache and Mourvèdre. And if you want something driven by Grenache, you go to the Gypsy. And if you want something driven by Mourvèdre, you go to our Three Halves wine. So we've got a wine for each of the varieties, basically, to be the headline act. But this is a firm favorite within our stable for a mid-tier wine that's great value for money, punching far above its weight. Ageability on this can go 10, 15 years. We know that. We have the wine to prove it. But it's also quaffable in its youth. This is the brand new 2020. We've gone through the popularity of these wines, have gone from 17, 18, 19, we just sold out basically. And, it's just this tiny little success story that is kind of in the shadow of the Chenins, but by no means has to stand back for those wines.
Which leads me, Sean, in closing, to ask you on the back of all of the conversation we've had on both your wines and the rest of the AdVini group. Going forward, you're juggling the Misfit range you make yourself, and you have a great deal of delight in doing, the Ken Forrester wines, and then working side by side with some other terrific winemakers, as you've said, over the course of the hour. How do you see the evolution of Ken Forrester and the evolution of this AdVini group as a South African collective that's hoping to have an impact not just for yourselves but for the greater good of South African wine?
It's great to be part of the group. It's just marvelous in that case, and the evolution of it going forward. They believe in us. They've seen the results. They came to us in South Africa, and having a larger footprint, and look out for AdVini group, the South African AdVini group in that case, where we want to dominate in that case, get some more awards, get Snoop up another decanter in that case. But definitely it's a great group to be part of. The winemakers are awesome. We work quite well together. And that's just what it is about. We're not in competition with each other. We're in competition with spirits and beer and etc. So we work quite well. And the evolution in that case, I see this for many more years. It will start to dominate the world. In that case, the wine world.
Proud and upbeat words, which I think chime with this week rather nicely. A final thought for you, Lo. You've brought the group up to Blair Atholl, and it's magnificent, if somewhat long surrounds if you're a golfer, and we're celebrating some terrific talent on the course this week, but some wine sitting alongside. It's a really nice parallel to the very best of South African spaces.
No, 100%. I think, you look at a course, firstly, like Blair Atholl, I'd never been there before, and it's actually sacrilege that I hadn't. With so much history in itself, a Gary Player course, Gary Player being one of the original first best golfing sportsmen exports to South Africa ever had, and to see the field out there today, the young talent that's going to bear the flag for South Africa going forward, sort of fighting tooth and nail on day one already. But these sort of things, and you pair it up with a brand or brands like ourselves across all 5 brands, Kleine Zalze, Ken Forrester, Lavenier, Stellenbosch Vineyards, also going out there and representing South Africa on a different sporting stage, if you will, but nonetheless also competitive. And as you said, the parallels are there. And I just look forward to many more years relationship, be it with Investec and the SA Open, and also just with AdVini taking our wines to the globe and going to take the challenge to the world, like Ken says.
Which leaves you really with the opportunity to do two things. If you happen to be up in the Gauteng area over the next few days, come along to Blair Atholl and the Investec South African Open. There's some remarkable golf talent here. Some guys hit the ball obscene distances and are representing not just South Africa, but countries from all over the world, because this is an event that sits on the DP World Tour. But also, whether it is this week, if you happen to find yourself in hospitality or in the Golf Village, where the wines we've discussed are all available, or you're just wandering down to your local Pick and Pay this weekend, have a look out for some of the wines we've talked about today. Try them out, sample them, see what you like, see what you don't, because one of the great opportunities we have here in South Africa, and today has shown exactly that, is to try the wines that Low travels the world, showcasing to restaurants and supermarkets absolutely everywhere, and get them far cheaper and a lot more easily right here at home. From Blair Atholl and the Investec South African Open, with Low and the team from AdVini, and headlined by Sean Matase, who's one of my favourite young winemakers. That is this week's episode of Dan Really Likes Wine. I'll be back on Monday. It's our final week of live shows next week. Some very special guests through the course of next week as we wrap up 2022 and look ahead to another wonderful year for South African wine. I'm off to have another glass of wine and maybe hit a few putts on the practice green. Until next week, goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.